or she planting. Everybody helping, no money ain't passing. It's tradition on the island.
5 minutes after 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago, the happy sound of Lord Nelson as we move into the second hour of Morning Edition on this Wednesday. I'm sure you're familiar with this situation. You ever have a situation where somebody telling you something without telling you something? This morning my director asked me if I have a comb. We're basically trying to say I'm looking wrongful up, but he don't want to tell me that. But I didn't know whether to take offense or whether to smile at the reference. But again, you notice that, oh, maybe you should get a haircut, or you're here to ask him if I have a comb. You should go into law. But let's talking about law. The gradual full reopening of the economy continued on Monday, with the automotive and manufacturing industries getting back underway. Borders are set to reopen on Saturday. Restaurants to reopen on Monday with curbside delivery only, curbside service and delivery only. Let's get the views from the Tobago Business Chamber. The always outspoken president of that organization, attorney at law Martin George, joins us. Mr. George, very good morning to you. You've always advocated for Tobago to be fully opened up, to be vaccinated, for all to be vaccinated and so on. Are you still holding to that view? Good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Fazir. And, at least it's a good thing your director didn't ask if you had a mirror, So it wasn't so bad if he just limited it to the home. But yes, we are maintaining our position, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. We are maintaining our position that priority ought to be given to Tobago, and there's no excuse now. If we have 800,000 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine present in the country, then with a population of, say, max 60,000, you talking about 45,000 doses to be given to Tobago, and the second dose, that's 90,000 out of 800,000. You could easily deal with that, get Tobago fully vaccinated, and get Tobago reopened fully. And the reason why I stress this, Fazil, is that while we are grateful and we've always been thankful for, whatever light we can see at the end of the tunnel, we are saying that if you're talking about opening up international borders, and, there are persons who are dreaming or fantasizing that, tourists will return. The reality is no tourist is going to return, or no tourist is going to sit and plan a vacation to come to a country where you're under a state of emergency, you're still under curfew, most of your businesses are still not opened, your beaches are not opened, most of your public spaces are not opened, you can't sit down in a restaurant and dine, you can't go to a bar, if you follow me. So therefore, we're saying that, look, you can't be half pregnant in the circumstance. If it is that we do have the vaccines and we're saying vaccinate to operate, then we're saying vaccinate Tobago so that Tobago can operate. Give Tobago that priority. It's a small community. You could easily get that done. And at least we can now have that fully opened. It may take a bit longer for all of Trinidad to be reopened, and we recognize that. So in other words, at least allow people to be able to come across to Tobago, let them be able to go to the beach. You have the August vacation coming up. Most families in Trinidad, they plan their August vacation, and it does involve, in many cases, going to Tobago. But what's the point of going to Tobago if you can't go to the beach, you can't go in a public space, you can't go do a rainforest tour, that kind of thing. You can't even go and take your family out to dinner, to sit and dine in a restaurant. So therefore, let's be practical, let's be realistic. And this has nothing to do with, trying to give Tobago an advantage. It's actually giving the entire nation an advantage, because everybody's been under stress for this lockdown and the, curfew and state of emergency. People need a release, they need an escape, they need a way to, just be able to go and relax. So even if you can't get all of Trinidad up and running immediately, Tobago, you could get up and running in very short order, open it up fully. Let people be able to fly across the Tobago, go enjoy themselves, line, relax, and then maybe come back and face the, everyday life back in Trinidad.
Indeed. I like the way you put it, like you're making the Tobago a paradise and Trinidad is a hell in that sense. But I understand the context in which you put it.
Island state. We're an island state.
Absolutely. But aren't you actually assuming that the majority of people in Tobago are willing to be vaccinated in the first place? Do you know that to be a fact?
This is the flip side of it for you, and I mean, we have always said that the government ought to use gentle persuasion, right? We've seen the hints from the government whereby the Prime Minister has used the catchphrase, vaccinate to operate. But at the end of the day, there needs to be more than that. We need to see marketing. We need to see advertising. We need to see public relations campaigns. The government can use many of our soca artists, our local playwrights, our stars who the public can relate to, even public personalities such as yourself. You know, the government can use people to get that message across to the public. Hey, listen, it's important to be vaccinated. Let me tell you something, Fazil. In the US, I've seen ads on television where the former President Barack Obama, he is urging and giving messages for people to be vaccinated. His wife, Michelle, also. You have Ice-T giving messages for people to vaccinate. You have John Legend. So in other words, they are trying to reach out to people to say, hey, listen, you need to be vaccinated. So get that message across with the carrot rather than the stick. There are some states in the US where they give out free lottery tickets. Some places give free beer. Some places give you a free ride to go and vaccinate. Uber has started a campaign where they're giving you a free ride to wherever your vaccination destination is, you know, so therefore let's do that in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's not just a question of getting the vaccines in Trinidad and Tobago, which we've achieved. It's now the question of getting the public to accept it, because there's still lots of vaccine resistance, you know, vaccine hesitancy, and you have the outright anti-vaxxers. So therefore we need to also deal with them while we taking care of those who are willingly coming forward to be vaccinated.
In fairness, as far as that information being given out, I think we've seen some public service message from a number of prominent personalities, not just the political ones or the religious ones, but what you're suggesting basically, it should be much more comprehensive.
Yes, it needs to be ramped up. It needs to be ramped up further, because I'll tell you, you know, if you notice, there are lots of people who you see on the social media platforms who, for little or no reason or logical basis, seem to have an outright fear or hesitancy or resistance. And, you know, they're not trusting the science, they're disputing everything. But the reality is, and this is the data from countries all around the world, right now, 99.5% of all COVID-19 deaths are from unvaccinated people. So if that data and that fact doesn't tell you, well, look, there's a higher chance of you putting yourself in danger if you are unvaccinated, then I don't know what will. Because you see, some people, I saw a classic comparison. They said COVID-19 vaccine research, and they showed, a scientist in a lab with a coat and, comparing the data, carrying out their experiments. And then they said, the other picture showed, a woman sitting in a corner on her cell phone, playing on her cell phone, looking at social media, and they said, anti-COVID research. So basically, you have to understand what we're up against. And the fact is, a lot of people get their information that way, and they believe what they see. They don't trust the science. So we have an uphill task in convincing those people. Look, for instance, the present situation with the fast food outlets. There are two major fast food chains for zero that have said, look, hey, we've tried by persuasion, but it appears some of our employees don't wish to be vaccinated for whatever reasons. And they're saying, look, we respect your rights if you don't want to be vaccinated. However, we will not roster you to work if you're unvaccinated. You see? So, I mean, it comes down to that. And then, of course, that spins it into a whole new dimension for zero. Because the question is, can an employer force an employee to be vaccinated? And
you know fully well,
does not want to be vaccinated, could you take them off the roster?
Exactly, and I mean, you're a legal person yourself, and if I might say, a legal luminary as well. I'm trying to butter you up as much as I can to get something out of you this morning. I mean, where do you see this going? Because I mean, if you're talking about vaccinate to operate, if you're talking about opening up Tobago, are we going to have to wait beyond that persuasive message to say you don't want to get vaccinated, you can't work?
Good question. Okay, so let's look at it quickly. We've had the statement from the president of the industrial court, Honor Deborah Felix, where she has basically said, look, an employer cannot unilaterally change the terms and conditions of employment to force an employee to vaccinate. Now, notice how these companies are approaching it. These two major fast food companies, they are not saying that they're forcing you. They're simply saying, we are going to prioritize the employees who are vaccinated. So when we fix in our roster, those who are vaccinated will get first choice. So basically, you may end up just not being chosen, not being chosen, not being chosen. After a few weeks, after a few months, after a year, what does that tell you? Doesn't that tell you basically you've been dismissed? You are no longer employed. So you have cases, say for instance, we have the case of Communication Workers Union versus Mega Group Bright Industries, where the industrial court said, introducing new terms and conditions of service with respect to a worker. In order to do so, the principle of good industrial relations dictates that the company meets with the recognized bargaining union and commences discussion. So in other words, what they're saying is that it ought to be a bilateral process, not unilateral. So in other words, the industrial court sides with the worker, because I've seen lots of people in the public asking, well, what is the recourse of the workers? The industrial court does provide refuge if it is that you've been dismissed, because at the end of the day, that can amount to constructive dismissal if it is that you are simply rostered out of your shift, on a long-term or maybe permanent basis. That would be considered constructive dismissal. And the industrial court does provide some refuge, of course, that's provided you are unionized, and all those things. But that's it from the worker's side. From the employer's side, we have the law also. We have to consider the fact that the Occupational Health and Safety Act mandates that an employer must provide a safe system of work. So take, for instance, you running a private nursing home, or say, for instance, a private hospital, and you have employees who say that they don't want to be vaccinated. How do you treat with that as an employer? Because at the end of the day, these unvaccinated persons could pose a greater risk for either your patients or your staff. And then where does that leave you? Does that expose you to liability for not providing a safe system of work or a safe place of work? So some employers are more in that scenario than others. And, it's always a fine line to walk as to how do you effect this. But lastly, Fazir, the law again is coming to our assistance. Let's remember, when the smallpox epidemic was ravaging countries in Europe, what happened in the UK in 1853, they actually had to pass legislation making vaccination for smallpox mandatory. So they passed their legislation making mandatory smallpox vaccination the law in the UK. Similarly to what is happening now, you had resistance to it. And this is 1853, more than 150 years ago. And so it's interesting how history repeats itself for zero. And that's why I'm always a student of history and a student of the law, because when we look back, we can always find some precedent to guide us. And in the UK, they eventually had to amend the legislation some 45 years later to cater for persons who, for religious reasons or health reasons, had a legitimate and valid reason to say, look, I cannot or I don't wish to be vaccinated. So similarly, I think if Trinidad and Tobago were to go that route of trying to have mandatory legislation for vaccinations, you will see persons filing constitutional motions, judicial review, challenging it the same way. But at the end of the day, sometimes it is necessary to have a law for that to ensure that, look, the greater good is achieved. And we in Trinidad and Tobago also have precedent for that. And I want to share that with you also, Fazir.
Please do, please do.
Sorry?
Please do, please go right ahead.
Yes. When we look at what happens, say, for instance, in the education system, let's think back, Fazil. When we were children, we all were vaccinated. And you remember, you used to have your immunization record for school. There's a reason for that. That's because there's a law in Trinidad and Tobago at present, the Section 5 of the Public Health, Nursery Schools and Primary Schools Immunization Act. That's why I always love the law for zero. It's so important when we look back. This is chapter 2803 of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And this provides that primary school age children must be vaccinated in relation to certain, diseases, etc. So therefore, if they're not, they are not allowed to enter school. So we actually have law in Trinidad and Tobago at present that deals with the question of mandatory vaccination, basically, because if you are not vaccinated, they're saying, look, the school has the right to refuse you entry. And then, of course, remember, under the Education Act, any child of primary school age must be in school. So therefore, if you have to put the child in school by the law and the child has to be vaccinated by the law, then that is basically mandatory vaccination there, So we do have precedent already, but of course, I would imagine in these times, it's going to be a flashpoint and a really touchy subject for the government to approach by way of mandatory vaccination. So which is why it comes right back full circle to what I've been saying. It's better the government takes the approach of trying to encourage people with the carrot rather than the stick. Try to get gentle persuasion out there, get that message out there through advertisement, through, whatever, and try to encourage people, convince them, educate them, enlighten them, so that they now willingly want to be vaccinated.
And I'm really appreciating that perspective. Actually, I have my vaccination card. I had it this morning with me because I was making another point. I have my vaccination card from all my polio and cholera and tetanus and whatever. And
that's
but
correct.
the issue is now, Mr. George, in the time that we have available, we have about 5 minutes left. Given that this is going to be, no doubt, as you said, a heated discussion, you're going to get lots of opinions, you're going to get lots of legal challenges. Will that actually impact on the ability, not just of Trinidad, of course, but Tobago specifically, actually being open for business and to take advantage of whatever opportunities that are going to be there?
Yes, well, the thing is, honestly, if you notice, the government is dancing around the issue very gingerly and with good reason. Because if at all they raise that talk about them going to make the vaccinations mandatory, you're going to get a blowback. You're going to get a pushback. So that's why I'm saying they should not even put that on the table at this point. Try with the gentle persuasion. Try ramping up the ads, the social media persuasion to get people on board with the idea of the necessity to vaccinate. Show them the data. Show that, look, the majority of persons who die of the virus are the unvaccinated. So therefore, if you remain unvaccinated, you are putting yourself, your family members, your friends, your loved ones at greater risk. So I think really and truly, we have to take that approach and get that message out there and try to convince people by, as I say, gentle persuasion rather than using the stick.
And what are you hearing on the ground in Tobago, whether from the business people, whether from general working people, because obviously you would interact with people at all levels in the sister island?
Right. Well, actually, I'm hearing a lot of negativity in terms of being vaccinated. So that's why I'm really calling upon the government to, get that message out there. And maybe they might have to, get some Tobago specific ads because, sometimes, there are ways that you can reach the population in Tobago that are different to, methods you may use in Trinidad. But I think a lot of work needs to be done for zero. I know persons personally in Tobago who, with not one shred of logic, reason, or common sense, have made it clear that they are not going to be vaccinated. You ask them, well, okay, what's the science, what's the data, what's the information you're relying on? And they tell you the most absurd and inane theories, that it was designed to kill black people and that, you will be dead in 2 years if you take the vaccine, that it's a microchip that they implant. I mean, the stories are just so absurd and inane. But the point is, they are firmly believed. And that's the frightening part. And that's what the government has to confront. And that's why I think greater work needs to be done, even in Tobago. So it's not just a question of, say, getting the vaccines to Tobago and saying you're going to prioritize Tobago. You also need to get the message and get into the minds and hearts of the people to get them to want to be vaccinated so that they see the greater good and they see that it's of benefit to themselves, their families, and their loved ones.
Mr. George, thank you very much as always for taking the time to be so comprehensive in your response. Although I do regret the fact that you mentioned the mirror, because I know my director is going to walk in tomorrow with a mirror. Exactly, sending a message. Thank you very much once again.
Okay, thanks a lot, Fazil. Have a good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
You take care, Martin George, giving us a broader context, not just in relation of the economy, but this entire issue of the vaccinate to operate. This is the mantra of the government. It's not we making it up. They went with the vaccinate to operate in early June. And now, as Mr. McClatchy was candid enough to point out, they're kind of late in the game. In now coming up with trying to get a policy, hopefully to come up with a position in a couple of weeks' time by which more and more businesses are supposed to be operating. Well, as we head to the break at 7:24, here's a submission by a viewer called Trinidad, and that image is of, I'm trying to work out, I look at it has a tail, and it has to be it's kind of small in between the leaves there, but maybe Trinidad could tell you eventually what it is. But now we also have an image by J. Ali, which we'll present to you. There we go, the hibiscus, what you might almost call the traditional hibiscus, which you never get tired of seeing. It really does lighten up a garden space, especially when the sun is out as brightly as it is with this image. We'll be right back.
There is